All right, we're live. That was actually pretty simple and easy and seamless. Wow, nice. All right, y'all. Well, just welcome everyone. Thank you, Diana and Sean and Araya, for your participation here today. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in live on Facebook. So we're here today to discuss anti-Asian racism and how we can show up and support them in solidarity with our AAPI family, so our Asian American Pacific Islander family. And so before we really dive into this conversation, I'd like to introduce myself and then kind of pass the mic and just give everyone an opportunity here to introduce yourselves. And you can share anything you'd like to share. I'm going to share my name and pronouns to start with, and my role here at the YW. And then I'll pass it to Diana, and then Diana, if you could just pass it to the next person just to keep things moving. So my name is Trey. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the racial justice advocate at the YWCA of Asheville. And I also work for and with the Racial Justice Coalition in this role. And Diana, if you'd like to go, can you unmute yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you, Trey. I'm Diana Sierra. I'm the interim CEO at the YW. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I am just glad to be here with this awesome group of people to talk about what we're here to talk about today. So I'll pass it to Araya.
Hi, my name is Araya Ratanaprik. I use she and they pronouns. I'm the peer support coordinator at Our Voice, Buncombe County's anti-sexual violence and human trafficking agency. And most of my outreach is with and for AAPI communities, as well as LGBTQ plus communities. And I am a first generation Southeast Asian American and white.
Hey y'all, I'm Sean Miller. I am the volunteer coordinator with Our Voice. I also do a lot of advocacy and outreach in our community. I identify as mixed and also do a lot of outreach with LGBTQ plus community. Oh, and I use she, they pronouns.
All right, well, thanks y'all. Well, from there, we'll just dive right in. So, obviously what brings us here today is we just want to show up and have a conversation about how we can show up and how we can be in solidarity with our AAPI family members. What that looks like, why it's important, and where we can go from here. So I do just want to kind of set some context here around this conversation. So as we probably all remember, about 3 weeks ago, there was a series of horrific murders in Atlanta. So 8 people were killed, 6 of whom were women from the AAPI, the Asian American Pacific Islander family. And those victims were, I'm going to do my best to pronounce these names here, so I'm just going to apologize in advance if it's incorrect, but Soon Chung Park, Hyun Jung Grant, Soon Cha Kim, Young A Yu, Xiao Jie Tan, Dao Yo Feng, Delana Yan, and Paul Michaels. And so what happened, right, in Atlanta, so this man went to 3 separate spas and murdered these folks. It was very evident that these were targeted killings against hate crimes, really, against Asian American Pacific Islander community. And specifically these women who are working at these spas. The man has been charged with 8 counts of murder. There hasn't been any talk of being charged with or there's been conversations about him being charged with a hate crime, but that has not come forth yet. And it's also worth noting here that a lot of the reporting around this incident was kind of dualistic, kind of dual-sided here. So for example, Captain Jay Barker of the Cherokee County, he's a policeman there. He kind of rationalized this violence by this young white man as you know, he was saying he was having a quote unquote really bad day. He was a sex addict. Other members of his community were saying that he was an upstanding, God-fearing, church-going individual dedicated to the faith. And then on the flip side of that, there was somewhat of a vilification of the victims here, kind of a dehumanization of them, saying, you know, oh, kind of rationalizing it by saying, you know, it's just the nature of the trade, things of that nature. And then, of course, leading up to this event, we saw a surge in violence against the AAPI community, against AAPI community members surge by 149%. We saw the formation of a nonprofit dedicated to this because there was such a surge. And we've seen, or there have been reported roughly 3,800 incidents of violence and acts of hate against the AAPI community between last March and this February, so just in a year's time. So with all that being said, I guess my first question is, like, what are we witnessing right now? What are kind of the underlying factors that are leading to these acts of violence and hate that we're seeing? And who would ever like to jump in, is welcome to do so.
I mean, I think there are a number of intersecting forms of hate that are a result of white supremacy, because you have ageism, because a lot of the AAPI community members who are being attacked right now are elders. We have misogyny. We have the stigmatization of sex work and the criminalization of sex work and the perception of Asian American women as tools for sexual pleasure, I suppose, and solely that's what they are. But that is not to say that there is anything wrong with doing sex work. And also, what am I thinking of right now? That's what I can identify at this moment. You know, and I think a lot of that is reflected in this recent shooting as well.
Araya said a lot with that, and we could spend hours unpacking everything you just said, and you just went for it and you named it, and I thank you for that. Like, that's what it's about, and that's what these conversations are about. I just want to take a minute and thank you, Trey, for naming the victims. I'm actually, like, you know, getting a little choked up just taking a moment to think about the lives impacted. You know, we talk about victims, we talk about survivors, and so often we don't take time to name their names, to say their names out loud and think of each person as a human being. And to me, that's part of, you know, Trey, you asked what's happening here. And that to me is part of what's happening. I fear that as a community and as a society, we are becoming so used to these acts of violence and of hate that some of us and probably a lot of us in some ways are callousing over, and we're not taking a minute to step back and really think about what's in front of us and feel it. I would argue that the folks that described the shooter as all of these pretty pleasant things, God-fearing, church-going, having a bad day, that if they really stepped back and took a minute to really think about the lives lost and to name them, and maybe even go as far as to replace that name with someone they love or they care about, we would be having a different discussion. And so I just, you know, before we really dive in, I just want to thank you for having me take a minute to pause and reflect on that.
I definitely echo all of those sentiments, especially naming their names. I think a lot of what's happening is we live in a society today that is so disconnected from each other. And I think a byproduct of our disconnection, not only living in a pandemic, but also just living in a society that relies on technology, there's a certain level of humanity that I think some people are missing out on. And we feel really disconnected from other folks. So it's hard to put ourselves in their shoes, which is something that cultivates empathy and compassion. And I think that is probably something that's happening. You asked what's happening, and I think what's happening is we're losing a piece of our humanity, our natural ability to empathize with other people.
I kind of want to lend an alternate perspective to what's been said. I think there's so many ways of viewing this and like realities around it, you know, like for me, having access to media, social media, and has created a situation where like exposure to these types of events are reaching more people. And because, you know, the history against Asians in America and Asian Americans has been happening since like the turn of the century, like basically since, you know, globalization or the industrial era. And not a lot of it has been kept not underground, but like it hasn't been visibilized. And I think right now is the time that it's, you know, becoming more visibilized through media, but also, you know, our current situation with coronavirus, and there is a surge of more media-worthy violence against us, but it's been happening for generations without, you know, the knowledge of many people. You know, as a result of U.S. intervention, like many of us in Southeast Asia have been displaced, and you know, Japanese imperialism, which began during the industrial era, and a lot of it was because the Japanese felt that they had to take that on that role because they lacked the natural resources that other countries that were developing had, and they felt vulnerable being an island. So what they did is they imperialized many countries in their own in Asia, in East Asia, and the result of that was like the sex trafficking of women. U.S. interventions in Southeast Asia, the result was like poverty, putting people in a position where sex work was like the only option to survive. And this is a reflection of how a tool of white supremacy, where we don't stand together and we work against each other in order, because the standard is, you know, the capitalist white supremacist model, right? That we feel that we have to live up to. And so, you know, I think it's a really good lesson for us to see that like we need to work together, you know, if we're going to fight this and we're going to like, you know, aim for a just world. But yeah, so for me personally, I'm like seeing that like other people can see what's happening to us, like is validating, I guess, is my main point. But
thanks for that history and that context, Araya.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, and you also, I appreciate that too. And you named something that I have been kind of coming back to. And you know, I don't want to, for myself, the massacre that took place in Atlanta is one among many acts of violence. And so as I talk, I want to be mindful to, sure, maybe use that as an example, but also acknowledge that even since then, there's been several more acts of violence that I've read about, that I've seen. You know, a recent event that that footage was released about in New York City, several. So, but you know, with that, I wanted to share also something that you said about you know, capitalism and the role that power and wealth plays in this conversation is an important one. And that intersectionality there, I think, is worth acknowledging, because so often when we talk about sex work, we talk about the sex worker, and we don't talk about the person who has the money in hand, who's purchasing the sex. And so, you know, it's just an interesting part of this conversation that stands out to me, that, you know, we have folks with wealth that represent the white community, that are accessing this space, and we're not talking about that. We're talking about the individuals only on one side or one part of the equation, and that's a big piece that's missed. And I think it would naturally misinform people if we only highlight one small sliver of the full story, and we don't acknowledge all of the parts of our community and all the members and individuals that are influencing how we got here and where we're at, and both sides of the exchange, so to speak. So anyways, I just think that's what stands out to me about what you were saying, Araya.
Definitely. And I think I overspoke originally. I just wanted to point out that I'm sure all of us here know this, but people who work in massage parlors are often immigrant or migrant workers, like the Asian ones. Not everyone is doing sex work. Most of them are not getting trafficked. Because I just wanted to say that before we talk about sex work more. Yeah, I think it is important to show like who pays for sexual services. I think it's important to humanize and show the diversity on both ends, because it's criminalized, there's a lot of opportunity for people like this shooter to take advantage of people who are doing sex work because they have no labor rights. It's criminalized. There are also people who pay for sexual services or sex because they may have like a disability that keeps it from them, that may be an obstacle to dating. Certain people who have sexual proclivities that they can't ask their partners for, people who are lonely and elderly, like there's all kinds of people, who are paying for these services. And I think understanding that diversity could also help us understand like there is a diverse number of people doing sex work for different reasons. And capitalism is definitely like something that, most of us have to work for a living. And it's, if I could have it my way, I would not work at all, but that's not possible. So like, we're all in a certain way, like trading off certain things, like certain comforts or certain desires to survive, right? And I think it's important to, like, for sex work, if we take away the like moral kind of assumption that like someone doesn't enjoy that work or doesn't want to be doing it or is forced into it, then I think we can see the bigger picture in terms of like who is being coerced, who's being taken advantage of, and who's not. Yeah.
I think that also brings us into this bigger conversation of noticing and acknowledging the power structures that we all live within, like the ones that you named at the beginning, Araya, and even just this greater power structure of capitalism. It's really important to acknowledge that we all play a part in it on one side or the other, or in whatever capacity. We are all working and trying to navigate these certain power structures. And when you look at sex work, there are a lot of power structures that are going on there, and it can be really convoluted. And I think we have a lot of narratives that are kind of being thrown at us, and we're only able to see it through certain lenses. Mm-hmm. So just acknowledging what we are able to see within it and what we're not. Like both sides of, who is doing the work and then who's also paying for the work. So that's really important to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. A lot. We could just keep talking about this for forever, but some things I want to kind of highlight that you all kind of mentioned in your own ways are these kind of interlocking, interdependent systems of oppression, right? We've got white supremacy, of course. There's racial capitalism at play. Patriarchy, the dehumanization and validation of certain occupations, right? Which kind of ignores the underlying conditions of capitalism to kind of look at that overarching one of like, food costs money, this basic need that everyone has. If you don't have money, you can't get food, right? So everyone has to make ends meet by whatever means they can. And also this interdependent, interlocking notion of humanity. And I think, Sean, you spoke to this really well, of cultivating empathy and compassion, because at the end of the day, we are all in this together. And these events hit heavy in certain communities, and they also hit heavy on all of us. And Araya, what you were saying too, is there's so much more access and so much more visibility with these things happening, and it's truly a global. I mean, we're seeing how we're interconnected on a global level. And so I guess my next question is, like, where do we go from here? How do we? Well, I'll just leave it there. Where do we go from here?
I think
That's a big one.
I think fundamentally, like, the points that I guess I'd like to clarify is that working together, all of us who, you know, are experiencing different forms of oppression as a result of white supremacy, I think it's important for us to learn about each other's heritage, lifestyles, history, etc., and really try to understand each other and support each other and uplift each other. Because if we don't do that, then, you know, the disparity that white supremacy creates will just become larger. And so education, and I think trying your best to dismantle any prejudgments you may have over situations or people, in order to expand our minds, you know, to fully understand the, like, big picture of what's going on, and support each other respectfully. So that's the first thing that popped up in my mind.
To kind of jump onto that, I think a big thing that needs to be happening is we just need to be talking to each other more and having these conversations more, and also accept the fact that some of these conversations are going to make us feel uncomfortable, but encouraging not only ourselves, but the folks that we're having these conversations with to lean into discomfort. That's kind of been my motto for the last year, is to lean into discomfort, because it's not always going to be easy, and it's going to be work, and there are going to be things that we don't understand, and pride can come into play a lot. But I think understanding the fact that, like, we don't know everything, and we don't know everything about everyone, and we need to break down the misconceptions that we have about not only our own backgrounds, our own understanding of the world, but the perspectives of everyone around us.
Totally. And, like, we should definitely also be respectful of the fact that, like, we don't expect the people around us to know everything. I feel like I've noticed that that's a big issue sometimes, that people will hold back because we've been taught that if we don't know a certain topic that's brought up, we don't, you know, we're not honest about, not just, I don't know about that. We feel afraid that we're going to be looked down upon. So encouraging, like you were saying, encouraging one's
points as Trey was asking the question, and I literally wrote, like, conversation, honesty, and proximity. So, like, I think we're on the same page. You know, and I with that, I really liked what you added to that, Araya, in terms of not needing to know it all. Like, I have been really and honestly surprised by the lack of honest conversations in my own personal circles. I'm speaking for myself. My friends and my family are not talking about this. They're not talking about the violence and the hate, and you know, there's small little pockets of conversation that tend to veer more towards politics and not towards racism and all the power structures that we have named throughout this conversation. And I think it goes back to, we don't have it all figured out. And we, like, I'm saying we as in my family and my friends and my circles. we don't have it figured out, and we haven't created a space where we can step into the discomfort and be brave and just name that and explore, and not necessarily need to figure it all out. I'm not entering this conversation today with the three of you thinking I'm going to be an expert and I'm going to have all my questions answered by the end of this conversation. It's a journey. And you know, what I love about the four of us coming together and the fact that our voice is at the table in this conversation is every time I've interacted, I can speak for my working relationship with Araya. Like every time I've interacted with her, I have learned something. I have walked away with a nugget, right? Like, and it's something that just adds to my journey and my growth. It's not something that we have to meet and figure out and then it's done. But I think even that is part of our way in which we've been socialized as a society to be perfect. Some of that white supremacy culture that we need to know it all. We need to pick ourselves up and have arrived before we can have a place or space at the table. And dismantling some of that and having it be reframed for ourselves as a process and as a journey. There are things that I know today that I didn't know even just a year ago or 2 years ago. And that is okay, as long as I do better once I know better. And as long as I am continuing to pursue my own personal growth and development. And so that's something that I've been thinking about as I've been, you know, at the virtual dinner table, so to speak, with my friends and family, and trying to find ways to have these conversations. How can we just make it more? How can we make these conversations more accessible? And you know, Sean, you and I did a little interview for another Our Voice event a couple of weeks ago, and I talked a lot about proximity, and to me that's the first step, like being in relationship with people that sure might be similar to you, but might also be different to you. And then the next step to me is creating that space where that proximity can lead to honest conversation and can lead to us stepping into our brave spaces and leaning into the discomfort. But it takes a lot of intentionality. And it does take that first one or two people in your peer group or in your hangout session to go there and start to tippy toe and tread into the water, because it is uncomfortable.
Yes, I just want to echo what you just said, being intentional about creating those spaces, being intentional about having those conversations. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want to echo what you said too. Just like, yeah, I mean, I'm finding I'm at a point in my life too where I don't really have any answers. Like, I really don't. But I have so many questions, and there's so much I learn from asking those questions and having these intentional conversations and being in these communities. Like with just this one, like I've learned about something about y'all personally, and I've learned something about myself in this conversation, and I've learned some history, and I've learned so much in this short half-hour period from asking these questions and engaging in these deeper conversations and being willing to be open and learn. And the kind of common thread I heard that everyone said was like kind of orienting away from white supremacy culture, which values individualism, which is contingent upon the concept of separation and separateness and hierarchical thinking, and moving into a space of more vulnerability and being willing to say like, hey, I don't know, like teach me about this or teach me about yourself. And because we're all kind of existing, we've all got these own realities in our head, and the more we can just check in with each other and see and like, you know, ask simple questions like, what did you mean by that? How are you doing? Like, and really aim to understand the person rather than to be right or to school somebody, but just having these honest conversations that are on kind of equal footing.
Definitely. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, no, I totally echo that. And I what I'm seeing right now happening is I really appreciate that everyone's saying, I don't have the answer, you know? And I think in terms of like non-hierarchical existing, that's really important to like be like, I don't have the answer, but we're all expressing a process, right? It's a constant transformation. There probably is never going to be an answer, right? And but that's the beautiful thing, because that leaves the opportunity for change and growth, like consistently. And it doesn't have to be in a linear way. Like it made me think of this this Chinese proverb. Actually, it's called "Life is not a straight and narrow path; it's a wiggle."
So good.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down. That was,
It's so good.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna put it on my cork board here.
That's a really good one. You know, and I don't want to get too in the weeds with this, but I feel the need to name it because having spent, I'm a social worker by background and by experience and training, and I spent a fair amount of my career in education. And there's a lot of research about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and literally how we can set young children on a course that will literally impact their life and their performance and their trajectory based on having these mindsets. So fixed mindset, and I won't over explain, but fixed mindset is the idea that I have these innate qualities that allow me to be successful in life. So I'm smart, I'm strong, I'm whatever, these things that are fixed, they're fixed qualities, versus growth, which is I may not be, and I truly identify as what I'm about to say. So vulnerable moment here. I may not be the smartest person. You know, I have my two brothers are both way smarter than me, way higher IQs, but you better believe I'm going to work hard and I'm going to read and I'm going to study and I'm going to do the things I need to do to succeed and make up for maybe that lack of high IQ or whatever it might be, that we can work towards, we can grow towards where we want to be. And I name that because I think that is so much a part of what we're talking about in terms of, I think some of us have a hard time with the wiggle, with the idea that our journey is a wiggle, that it's not this, linear process, and that it's messy and it's gray, and there might be things, I have to work at. And that, to me, there's beauty in that. There's beauty in the process, and there is strength in being humble and going through that journey, in proximity with people that you trust and that care for you. But it's a mindset shift, and I know that I myself have had to do a lot of work to get to that place where it's like again, I don't have to have it all figured out. The other thing, Trey, you asked earlier is like, where do we go from here? And we talked about relationship and connection and conversation. The other piece that I want to just name before we run out of time is I think being in a position where we're primed to act and step in as bystanders. So I viewed a news article about an older Asian American woman who was violently assaulted and kicked on the New York City subway. And I'm from New York, and it's just really hard to think about what's happening in New York right now. But to see in the video that there were several doormen and people that were witnessing this and chose to close the door while this was happening, instead of yelling, instead of trying to intervene. And I understand we have to think about our own personal safety in these situations. So I'm not advocating for jumping into a house that's on fire, but just being a little more primed to disrupt whatever is happening and step in. And it may not be, in terms of an act of violence, it could be in a conversation, it could be pivoting, it could be interjecting and disrupting whatever microaggressions we're witnessing. It could be literally aligning, I've done this in a conversation, aligning my body in a way where the person that might be feeling attacked knows I'm beside them, I'm with them, so that they know I'm here. I'm not speaking for them. I'm not, escorting them away, but I'm showing support. But again, that takes a level of mindfulness and being at the ready to step in. That I would hope we all would move more towards, myself included. There are times where I've missed those opportunities. 100%, I've missed it. But that video just really stood out to me about, what would I have done if I was the doorman? I would hope that I would have been at the ready to do a little bit more.
There's an organization called Hollaback, like HOLLA, if y'all are familiar. But they offer free bystander intervention trainings, specifically geared towards violence against AAPI individuals. So that could be an option for us who are trying to understand like how we can effectively do that, in mind the safety and the integrity of the people around us.
That's awesome. I'm going to check that out. I was not aware of that. So again, walking away with another nugget. Thank you.
Cool, y'all. Well, as we wrap up here, are there any final things that folks want to share or say?
I think one thing that has come to mind throughout just what's been happening in our society, but also throughout this conversation, is there is an aspect of fear that I think we all hold in our bodies. And that can have a really big effect on how we act, how we interact. So I think for me, it's really important to acknowledge when I am holding fear in my body and what I am holding fear around and how that is affecting how I show up in the world. When I watched that video that you were just talking about, Diana, I cried. And it made me realize that there was a lot of fear going on in that video. And I was also fearful when I was watching it, and I wasn't even there. Also, as a New Yorker, I was really affected. But yeah, I think just it's so important for us to acknowledge when we are in a place of fear and how we are letting that affect how we show up. That is something that I'm learning about myself every day is what is keeping me from showing up and what is helping me show up.
Thanks for sharing that, Sean. And it resonates with me too. 9 times out of 10, when I'm not at my best, fear is somehow there on my shoulder and in my heart. So I'm with you on that. The only other kind of closing thing I wanted to say was I just wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to say thank you to each of you for showing up and having a conversation, teaching me some things and giving me some more to think about and reflect on. And I want to give a major shout out to Our Voice. You all are doing the work. You all are living into your values in a way that I think sets an example for me and for our nonprofit community here in Asheville. Thank you for the work that you all are doing to support survivors of sexual violence and human trafficking. And any opportunity the YW can have to partner with you all, consider us your partners in this important work. So thank you.
I really appreciate that, Diana. I also appreciate everyone giving me the opportunity to participate. But moments like this are definitely healing for me, and I think are important for all of us in terms of working together. So great opportunity.
Awesome. Well, yeah. I just echo all of that. Thank you all for just showing up here today. And Araya, it was great to meet you, and Diana and Sean, great to see y'all again. And looking forward to a lot more conversations and being in community. And the thing that really stuck out to me here at the end, Sean, was that the simplicity of what you said, of just asking what is keeping me from showing up and what is helping me show up. think that's that second piece I often miss. You know, I try to be super aware of like, okay, what's keeping me, but it's like, I like that positive kind of reframe. Okay, but what is supporting me in this? What is helping me? And it's yeah, oftentimes community and honestly just being aware of that, like aware of the fear and naming it. Like you said, I got this from Sonia Renee Taylor, but it's this game, kind of name that system of oppression. And a lot of times my fear can be traced back to, oh, that's some internalized white supremacy, or that's some internalized homophobia. And then when I catch that, I can say, okay, well, that's not how I want to operate, and I can reorient towards something better. So thank you all so much, and yeah, we'll go forward together.
We'll continue the conversation for sure. Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day, everybody.
You too.
Yeah. Take care.
Right.